Before 1789, the medieval churches of Paris stood as symbols of immense power, owning a third of the city's land and commanding loyalty from millions. Then a single oath shattered the order. Priests faced exile, violence erupted, and sacred altars became stables. Why did an entire city turn against its faith so abruptly? The answer rewrites everything you think you know about the revolution. Paris, on the eve of revolution, was a city wrapped in the shadow of its medieval churches. Their stone towers and clustered spires dominated every horizon, each one a reminder of the Catholic Church's grip on daily life. The church owned a third of all land in the city, vast tracts stretching from the tangled alleys of the left bank to the open fields beyond the old walls. Every harvest, every loaf of bread, every market stall owed a tenth of its value to the church's tithe. For centuries, this was not just a matter of faith but of power. The cathedral chapter of Notre-Dame kept detailed inventories of relics and treasures, while monastic orders like the Benedictines at Saint-Germain-des-Prés managed sprawling estates and collected rents from thousands of tenants. At the heart of this spiritual empire stood Notre-Dame itself, the seat of the archbishop and the soul of Parisian Catholicism. Its treasury held reliquaries studded with gold and enamel, fragments of the true cross, the skull of Saint-Denis, and the bones of local saints like Geneviève and Marcel. Each relic drew pilgrims and reinforced the church's claim as guardian of the city's fate. The bells of Notre-Dame and its sister churches marked the hours, called the faithful to prayer, and told warnings in times of plague or war. For Parisians, the rhythm of life was measured by the liturgical calendar, feasts, processions, and fast-weaving religious ritual into the fabric of the streets. But the church's reach extended far beyond the altar. More than 100 parishes, chapels, and monastic houses dotted the city, their influence woven into every layer of government and commerce. The clergy administered charity, ran hospitals, and arbitrated disputes. Bishops and abbots sat in the king's councils, while the church's courts and registers recorded births, marriages, and deaths for nearly every Parisian. Even the city's great markets and fairs paid homage to patron saints, their processions winding past Gothic facades heavy with centuries of devotion. This dominance bred resentment as well as reverence. The church's wealth, its lands, and its relentless collection of tithes became a source of envy and anger among Paris's poor and ambitious. Beneath the incense and stained glass, a tension simmered, one that would soon erupt, not only against the monarchy, but against the very stones and relics that had shaped Paris for generations. On July 12, 1790, the National Constituent Assembly passed the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, a law that forced every priest and bishop in France to swear an oath of loyalty to the nation, above the Pope, above the Church. The oath was public, the consequences immediate. Jean-Baptiste Gobel, a respected cleric from Alsace, stood before the Assembly in February 1791 and recited the required words: loyalty to the nation, the law, the king, and the Constitution. His voice echoed across Notre-Dame's nave, carried by the tension of hundreds of eyes fixed on him. Gobel became Paris's constitutional bishop, a man caught between faith and survival, his every move scrutinized by both revolutionaries and fellow clergy. Not all priests followed. The city's parishes divided overnight into those who swore the oath, the juring priests and the so-called non-jurors, who refused. The schism was sharp. Official ledgers from the convention show that nearly half the Paris clergy resisted, risking immediate dismissal, arrest, or worse. The new law turned former shepherds of the city into outlaws, and the streets grew uneasy. The tension boiled over in September 1792. As the Prussian army approached Paris, panic swept the city. Revolutionary guards stormed the prisons, where hundreds of clergy, many arrested for refusing the oath, were being held. Over 2 days, mobs massacred 3 bishops and more than 200 priests, their names recorded in prison ledgers and hastily scrawled death lists. Blood soaked the stones of the Carmes monastery and La Force prison, while outside, crowds cheered the executions as acts of patriotic cleansing. The September massacres sent a clear message. The revolution would tolerate no hesitation, no divided loyalties. Goebel, though he had sworn the oath, found himself walking a narrowing path. His official statements to the convention grew more fervent. Altars of France would become altars of liberty, he declared. Yet private letters reveal a man haunted by the violence unleashed in the city he was meant to shepherd. The legal crack of the civil constitution had widened into a chasm, and Paris's medieval churches now stood at the edge, their fate bound to a conflict that was no longer just political, but lethal. The ideological war of 1793 was about to begin, and the city's sacred stones would soon bear the scars. In the autumn of 1793, Paris became the theatre for a kind of destruction never before seen in its long history. The Committee of Public Safety, with Pierre-Gaspard Chaumette at its vanguard, issued decrees that struck directly at the very symbols of faith and monarchy. On October 28th, workers mounted ladders against the western facade of Notre-Dame. With ropes and iron tools, they toppled the 28 stone kings, figures carved in the 13th century, thought by the crowd to represent French monarchs, but in truth, biblical kings of Judah. Heads crashed onto the parvis below, shattering on the stones as the crowd jeered and cheered. For days, fragments of faces and crowns littered the square, a warning to anyone who clung to the old order. Just weeks later, Chaumette and his allies orchestrated the transformation of Notre-Dame itself. On November 10th, the cathedral was stripped of its altars and relics. Its nave remained as a stage for the Festival of Reason. An actress, Mademoiselle Maillard, was enthroned atop an artificial mountain, clad in tricolour robes as the living goddess of reason. The archbishop's seat became a platform for speeches denouncing superstition, while choirs sang hymns to liberty and women danced in the aisles. The high altar, once reserved for the holiest rites, now displayed a torch of truth and busts of Enlightenment philosophers. Chaumette's letters reveal meticulous planning for this spectacle, but eyewitness diaries describe a scene at once chaotic and electric, part theatre, part riot. The old rituals were not just abandoned, they were deliberately mocked and inverted. Statues decapitated, altars defiled, centuries of devotion swept aside in a single season. For the revolutionaries, this was the triumph of reason over fanaticism. For those who remembered the city's medieval past, it was a nightmarish inversion, a city's soul paraded and profaned. By the spring of 1794, the old churches of Paris stood silent or broken, their doors locked, their sanctuaries emptied. Of France's 40,000 churches, almost none remained open for worship. In Paris, monastic libraries that had survived centuries of fire and war now vanished in a matter of weeks. 4 million volumes, sermons, chronicles, illuminated manuscripts were carted out of abbey vaults and heaped onto bonfires, their ashes drifting over stone courtyards. At Saint-Germain-des-Prés, monks tried in vain to hide precious codices. Eyewitnesses later recalled the smell of scorched parchment lingering for days. The human toll was just as stark. 30,000 priests fled into exile, their names entered in hurried lists by city officials. Hundreds who stayed behind faced the guillotine or prison. Monasteries became stables, their medieval altars buried under straw and manure. Parishioners who once knelt before relics of Saint Genevieve now found grain sacks piled where the choir had sung. Yet, in the midst of this devastation, a few voices spoke for preservation. Alexandre Lenoir, a young artist and archivist, began gathering fragments, tomb effigies from Saint-Denis, shattered statues from churchyards, arguing that even in revolution, art and memory deserved rescue. His efforts led to the first Musée des Monuments Français in 1795, a sanctuary for relics of a lost age. Centuries later, traces of the violence remain. In 2019, workers restoring Notre-Dame uncovered graffiti etched by revolutionaries, a faint echo of those years when faith, power, and stone all seemed to crumble together. Centuries-old stones once shaped by faith now bear silent witness to the power and peril of erasing the past. Today, more than half of Paris's medieval churches are lost. Their absence asks, when conviction becomes destruction, what fragments of culture and conscience do we risk forgetting forever? Share your thoughts below.